And we are back with Brett Stevens and Richard Haas talking about Iran. So the protests were something of a damn squib, to be expected because of the government show of force or something more?
Well, tactically, if I had been involved with the opposition, I would have said, don't come out and force the stay. It was too predictable. The regime had done everything it could to deny access to the internet, to arrest many of the leaders, to pre-position the Basij, the militia guys with clubs. So this was not the day to do your big show of force. More broadly, this is not the sort of thing that's going to be decided in an afternoon. A process is underway. Clearly the regime is nervous, or it wouldn't have done all the things it's doing. The revolution, or the opposition rather, is growing in strength ever since the fraudulent June 12th election. This is going to play out over time.
Yeah, but I hope you're right, because I think the question that is raised by the failure of the so-called Green Movement to come out in force is whether the movement has actually crested. It gained strength after the election. I think it had its high point with in December. It realized it could take advantage of these public occasions to protest, but it has no agenda. It has no real leader. I mean, Mousavi is one contender to the leadership, and so without a sense of direction of what they want other than opposition to the regime and of various kind of gradations, whether it's opposition to Ahmadinejad or opposition to the regime in toto, if they don't have a sense of where they're going to go, there's a real question of whether they can maintain the momentum they've enjoyed for the last 7 months.
You know, I also wonder about something that we don't talk about a lot in the United States, but which I found was something discussed more by people in Europe and actually in a place like India, which is just how much support does Mousavi have and just how much support does Ahmadinejad have. So that's last week, Steve Cull puts out this, very elaborate poll, a lot of telephone polling into Iran. Understandably, there's always the issue of whether people are being honest. There's always the issue about whether people are scared. But he points out, for example, that in the run-up to the election, they did telephone polling for the few months before. And remember, before the election, it was not so dangerous to come out in favor of Mousavi. A lot of politicians came out. People thought this was a genuine contest. June 11th, the vote, the poll, Ahmadinejad gets 57%, Mousavi gets 27%. Now, it waxed and waned, again, in predictable ways. Ahmadinejad was seen to have done better after the first debate. So my sort of big question is, could it be that, this is an urban, liberal phenomenon that we love because they seem to be opposed to theocracy and dictatorship, but actually it's 30% of the country, 35% of the country, not 80% of the country?
Well, the answer is we don't know, but if Ahmadinejad had more than 50% of the polls when it counted on election day, odds are they would not have announced the victor, that he won, before they had any chance to count the votes. So it suggests to me that people were probably lying, that they were playing it safe. They were saying they supported the regime when, in fact, they were voting in some ways against the regime. But I take your point. I don't know if the opposition's 25%, 50%, or more. And what perhaps matters just as much is how united is the establishment. We know the Revolutionary Guards have the upper hand right now. The clerical establishment, though, has some fissures in it. Yeah. Who knows about the Revolutionary Guard? The Army, another principal institution in the country, is not quite as radicalized. And what history suggests is that what matters often is, as much as the strength of the opposition, is the unity of the establishment. Are they prepared to essentially stay the course? Again, I don't know that.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the key point, because regimes like Iran only fall when the regime loses its will to continue to suppress the people. And the regime has cards to play. Khamenei has cards to play. I mean, there's plenty of opposition within the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards establishment, within the clerical establishment. There's a lot of opposition to Ahmadinejad personally. He's a character, and he's problematic to them. And so, I mean, you can see a scenario playing out in which Ahmadinejad simply decides or is declared that he has some illness and has to step aside, and some more acceptable face comes in and manages to mute the sense of outrage that his election sparked.
But, and to your point about the issue of, to what extent do these guys have an agenda, and what is the agenda? I was struck by, for example, we now know that Mousavi decided to criticize Ahmadinejad for some mild statements he made about the nuclear program, which sounded more dovish. So then in this poll, they asked people, do you support, nuclear power? Overall, the number of people who support Iran having a nuclear capacity is 55%. Among Mousavi supporters, 57%. Those that support both nuclear power and the bomb is 38% overall, 37% Mousavi. So in other words, Mousavi does not seem to be drawing from a group of people who are particularly different, at least on this international issue.
Yeah, but it's a critical issue nonetheless, because imagine a regime change scenario in which some new constellation comes into, some new order is established in Iran that looks less like the current clerical regime and say more like the government in Pakistan and then India. Then the whole Iranian nuclear question totally loses its salience, because the world can live with an Iranian nation state that is also a nuclear power. What the world has problems with is an Iran that has millenarian global revolutionary ambitions. That's where the difference lies. So you can support a nuclear Iran as an Iranian nationalist, or you can support it as a,
So for you, the capabilities are less important than the issue of reading Iran's intentions.
That's right.
And we're going to have to leave it at that. Richard Haas, Brett Stevens, thank you very much.